They told us the Bible was the beginning, the oldest, most sacred record of divine history, a book untouched by human hands, unaltered by time, a direct message from God himself. But what if that's not the full story? What if, buried beneath centuries of translation, reinterpretation, and suppression, lies an older truth, one that rewrites everything we think we know? Because long before the Bible was ever written, the very gods it warns against, the so-called false idols of the ancient world, were not only real, but part of a much older story. A story that began in Sumer, the cradle of civilization, where gods walked among men and shaped the destiny of humanity. Think about it. When you open your Bible, you see names like Babylon, Akkad, Ashur, Nineveh, cities that loom large in the mythic past of the Israelites. But those aren't their original names. The versions we recognize today have been filtered through layers of Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin translations. If we trace them back to their oldest form, we uncover something astonishing. Babel, Akkad, Nineveh, and Eridu, names in Hebrew. Babalu, Akkad, Ninua, and Eridu in Akkadian. Babar, Uri, Ninua, and Aidu in Sumerian, the oldest written language on earth. These weren't just cities. They were the domains of the gods. Every major city of Mesopotamia was ruled by a divine authority. Eridu belonged to Enki, the god of wisdom and the deep waters. Babylon was the seat of Marduk, the supreme deity of the Babylonian Empire. Uruk was ruled by Inanna, Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. Akkad was under the dominion of Ishtar as well. Nineveh, another city of Ishtar. Was the city of Nana, Sin, the moon god. And here's where things get even stranger. If these gods ruled Mesopotamian cities, wouldn't it make sense that their influence would be found in the Hebrew scriptures? After all, the Israelites spent centuries under Mesopotamian rule, from their time in Babylonian exile to their wars with Assyria. So do these ancient gods appear in the Bible? The answer is yes. The prophet Isaiah mocks Marduk under one of his Babylonian titles, Bel. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops low. Their idols are carried by beasts and cattle. Isaiah 46:1. The book of Jeremiah prophesies his downfall. I will punish Bel in Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he hath swallowed up. Jeremiah 51:44. And in the book of Daniel, we find the legend of Bel and the dragon, where the prophet exposes the deception of Babylonian priests. But here's the real question. Why were these gods condemned? Why did Yahweh command that their names be erased from history? What were they trying to hide? Because when we start pulling at this thread, the entire narrative begins to unravel. The more we dig, the more we realize the Bible wasn't written in isolation. It was shaped by the civilizations that came before it. It borrowed their myths, rebranded their gods, and in some cases, it absorbed them into the identity of Yahweh himself. So what does this mean for us? It means our past is far older, far more complex than we've been told. And if this is just the beginning, imagine what else has been buried beneath centuries of silence. That's exactly why we're here. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few who refuse to accept the surface-level story. You're here because you want answers, because you want the truth. So let's uncover it together. Subscribe now, because this is knowledge they don't want you to uncover. Have you ever questioned the Bible's connection to ancient Mesopotamian gods? Leave a comment below and let's discuss. What comes next might change everything. They call it the cradle of civilization, Sumer, long before Rome, long before Egypt, long before even the lands of Canaan and Israel. There was Sumer. It was the first civilization to master writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law. But here's the Paproth 4. They said their knowledge came from the gods, not the metaphorical, invisible deities that later religions would embrace. No, the Anunnaki, descended from the heavens, flesh and blood kings. Think about that. Every other ancient civilization claimed that kings were chosen by the gods, but the descended from the heavens. This isn't speculation. It's written, documented in one of the oldest historical records ever found, the Sumerian King List. This ancient text describes an era when the Anunnaki ruled Earth directly, reigning for thousands of years before eventually handing power over to mortal rulers. And here's the real question. If this was just myth, why did the Sumerians record the names of these rulers? Their deeds? Their wars? Their legacies? The answer? Because these gods were real. They walked among humans. They built the great cities. And if we look closely, we can still find traces of them hidden in the pages of the Bible. the stories you were taught as a child, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel, the fall of man, they weren't original, they weren't unique to the Bible, they came from Sumer. For centuries we've been told that Noah was the first man chosen to build an ark, a righteous survivor of God's wrath. But long before Noah, there was another story. In the Bible, it was Yahweh who commanded the flood. But in Sumer, it was Enlil, one of the most powerful gods who decided to wipe out humanity. But here's where it gets interesting. Enlil was not alone. Another god, Enki, defied the council and secretly warned a man named Ziusudra, instructing him to build a boat and preserve life. The flood came, it drowned the world. And when the waters receded, a covenant was made between gods and men. Sound familiar? It should. But here's the question no one asks. If the Bible is the first and only divine truth, then why does this exact same story exist in a culture thousands of years older than the Israelites? Could it be that Yahweh and Enlil were one and the same, both powerful rulers seeking to control the fate of mankind? And what about Enki, the god who gave humans forbidden knowledge, the one who went against the divine order to help humanity survive? What if Enki's role in this story is the same role played by the serpent in the Garden of Eden? What if the being we've been told was the ultimate deceiver, the one condemned as evil, was actually humanity's only true ally? And then we have the Tower of Babel, one of the most famous biblical stories of all time, a cautionary tale about human pride, about divine punishment. But what if it was something more? The Bible tells us that humanity, united under one language, sought to build a tower to reach the heavens, a grand achievement, an act of creation. But Yahweh, fearing their ambition, destroyed the tower and scattered their language so they could never unite again. Does that sound like the act of a benevolent God? Or the act of a ruler trying to suppress knowledge? The Sumerians told a similar story. Long before the Bible was written, they wrote of a time when all people spoke one language, when civilization was thriving. And then, the gods, led by Enlil, grew afraid of humanity's progress. They confused mankind's language and divided them across the earth, ensuring they would never challenge the gods again. This wasn't about punishing sin, it was about control. Every time humanity advances, something intervenes, something resets the cycle. And every time, we forget. To understand what happened to the Anunnaki, we must return to where it all began. The first city of mankind wasn't Jerusalem, it wasn't Babylon, it wasn't even Ur. It was Eridu, a place almost erased from history. According to archaeologists, Eridu dates back to 5400 BC, making it the oldest city ever recorded. But the Sumerians never claimed to have built it. They said it was built by the gods. Eridu was more than just a city, it was the center of knowledge, the domain of Enki, the god who gave mankind the tools to rise. And it wasn't alone. Eridu belonged to Enki. Babylon was ruled by Marduk. Ur was the domain of Nana, the moon god. Akkad was under the power of Ishtar. Nineveh, too, belonged to Ishtar. Each of these cities had a ruling god, a divine authority presiding over its people. But over time, something changed. The gods withdrew, their influence faded, and suddenly, a new power rewrote history. The Bible tells us that Yahweh was the one true God. But if that were true, why does the Old Testament spend so much time denouncing these so-called false gods? Why does it go to such lengths to erase their names? Unless Yahweh wasn't the first God, but simply the last one standing. So here's the question. What happened to the other gods? Were they truly defeated? Or did they choose to leave, waiting for the right time to return? Because the deeper we dig, the clearer it becomes. The Anunnaki were never just myths. They were rulers, architects of civilization, and then they vanished. Or maybe they never left. For thousands of years, we have been told that Yahweh is the one true God, the Creator, the Almighty, the ultimate ruler of heaven and earth. But what if that was not always the case? What if Yahweh was once just one of many gods? A ruler among rulers, locked in an ancient power struggle. A war that reshaped human history and erased the names of all who came before him? Because when we compare Yahweh to the gods of Mesopotamia, one name stands out. Enlil, the chief deity of the Anunnaki, and the similarities between them are too striking to ignore. Both Yahweh and Enlil were known for their wrath, their control, and their relentless punishment of mankind. Both were jealous gods, unwilling to share power, demanding absolute obedience. And most importantly, both were terrified of humanity gaining knowledge, so much so that they went to extreme lengths to suppress it. Think about it. In the Bible, Yahweh forbids Adam and Eve from eating the fruit of knowledge. When they disobey, he does not simply scold them. He curses all of humanity. In Sumerian mythology, Enlil seeks to destroy mankind with a great flood. Not because they were wicked, but because they had become too knowledgeable, too independent. And in both stories, there is another figure, one who dares to stand against the ruling God, one who seeks to empower humanity instead of controlling them. That figure is Enki. Enki, the rebellious god or humanity's true savior? While Enlil sought to punish and enslave mankind, Enki did the opposite. He gave humans knowledge. He taught them agriculture, mathematics, medicine, and astronomy, the very foundations of civilization, and for this he was seen as a betrayer among the gods. Does that sound familiar? Because in the Bible, there is another being who gives humanity knowledge, the serpent in the Garden of Eden. For centuries, we have been told that the serpent was the devil, the deceiver, the corrupter of mankind. But what did the serpent actually do? It offered knowledge. It told Adam and Eve the truth, that they were not meant to remain ignorant, that they had the potential to become like gods themselves. And what was Yahweh's response? Wrath, punishment, exile. Just like Enlil, Yahweh did not want mankind to ascend. He did not want them to think for themselves. He wanted obedience. He wanted control. So ask yourself, was the serpent truly evil? Or was it Enki, the same god who had once defied Enlil, fighting yet again to keep knowledge alive? If Yahweh was simply a rebranded version of Enlil, then that means the Bible does not tell the full story. It tells the story of the victor, the one who won the war, the one who destroyed all opposition and rewrote history in his own image. The war that erased the old gods. The Old Testament is filled with clues about this war. It constantly speaks of false gods, of ancient deities that Yahweh commands his followers to destroy, erase, and never speak of again. But why? If these gods were simply lifeless idols, why would Yahweh be so concerned? Why would he spend so much time warning against them, waging war against their followers, erasing their names from history, unless they were real, unless they were his enemies? And the evidence is overwhelming. Take the Nephilim, the mysterious giants of the Bible. They were said to be the offspring of the sons of God and human women. For centuries, theologians have debated who these sons of God were, but the answer is clear. They were the Anunnaki, the very same gods who once ruled Mesopotamia. And what did Yahweh do when he learned of the Nephilim? He ordered their extermination. In the book of Genesis, when Yahweh sees the Nephilim thriving, he unleashes the Great Flood, a global catastrophe designed to wipe out their bloodline. In the book of Numbers, when the Israelites enter Canaan, they encounter the Anakim, a race of giants said to be descendants of the Nephilim. And what does Yahweh command? Their total annihilation. He orders the Israelites to slaughter every man, woman, and child, leaving no survivors. But why? Because the Nephilim were proof of an older age. They were descendants of the defeated gods, the last remnants of a race that Yahweh sought to erase from existence. And he almost succeeded. Today, their names are all but forgotten, buried under centuries of rewritten history. The only traces left are in the Bible itself, hidden in verses that were never meant to be questioned. But the truth is still there, if you know where to look. Did Yahweh defeat the other Anunnaki to rule alone? Here's the final question. If Yahweh was once just one God among many, what happened to the others? Did they flee? Were they imprisoned? Or were they simply rebranded, absorbed into the identity of the God who won the war? Because the Bible does something very strange. It takes characteristics from multiple gods and merges them into Yahweh. El Shaddai, a name for Yahweh that means Lord of the Mountain. But who was the God of the mountain in Mesopotamian texts? Enlil, the Lord of Hosts, a title given to Yahweh implying that he commands an army of divine beings. But the Anunnaki were also a host of gods, a ruling council. The God of the storm, Yahweh, is often associated with lightning, thunder, and war. But Enlil was also called the storm god. Piece by piece, the traits of multiple Anunnaki rulers were combined, merged into a single being. And over time, all the other gods were erased. Final thought. Who really controls humanity? If Yahweh was once an Anunnaki, if he was once just another ruler in a pantheon of warring gods, then what does that mean for everything we've been told? Because history repeats itself. The gods of old waged war for control over mankind. They fought for dominion, for power, for absolute rule. And if that war happened once, could it still be happening now? Could there still be hidden forces shaping our world, just as they did thousands of years ago? Because one thing is clear, Yahweh was not the first God. He was simply the last one standing. And that means the real question isn't who he was, it's what happened to the ones who lost. Are they still out there? And most importantly, are they waiting to return? The remaining mysteries, Nephilim, Rephaim, and the enigma of Gilgal Rephaim, scene transition. The camera moves across an ancient landscape, ruins of colossal stone structures, eerie depictions of giants carved into rock, and vast burial mounds hidden beneath layers of history. The soft whisper of wind carries a sense of something long forgotten, something that refuses to be erased. Throughout history, there have been whispers of giants. Not the myths of fairy tales, not the legends of mere exaggeration, but actual, tangible beings who once walked this earth, towering over ordinary humans. The Bible calls them Nephilim. Ancient texts call them Rephaim. Archaeologists call them impossible. But what if I told you that they were real? That traces of their existence are still out there, buried in the ruins of forgotten civilizations, hidden in structures so massive, so unnatural, that even modern engineers struggle to explain them? Because long before history was rewritten, before their very existence was reduced to mere myth, the Nephilim ruled. And their story is far from over. The Nephilim, the bloodline of the Anunnaki, scene transition. A crumbling scroll is unrolled, revealing an ancient Hebrew script. The words of Genesis 6:4 appear on the screen. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4. This passage is one of the most controversial verses in the entire Bible, one that many scholars and religious leaders prefer to ignore. Why? Because it describes something that should not have been possible. A forbidden union between divine beings and mortal women, resulting in the birth of the Nephilim, hybrid offspring of gods and men, beings of immense size and strength, unlike anything the world had ever seen. But who were these sons of God? For centuries, theologians have debated their identity. Some claim they were fallen angels, others insist they were simply the sons of noble rulers. But when we dig deeper, when we go beyond the modern interpretations and return to the original texts, a different picture emerges. Because the sons of God were not mere angels, they were the Anunnaki. The same powerful beings worshipped by the Sumerians, the same rulers who once walked among humanity, shaping civilization itself. And if the Nephilim were their descendants, that means these so-called giants were not just myths. They were the last remnants of an older, forgotten world. The Rephaim, the last giants of the ancient world. Scene transition. A deep cave, untouched for thousands of years. The camera zooms into petroglyphs, carvings of towering figures, standing among much smaller humans. An eerie silence lingers, as if something still remains here, watching. The Bible does not just mention the Nephilim in passing. It continues their story through the bloodline of the Rephaim. The Rephaim were a race of giants, feared and reviled by the Israelites. In the book of Numbers, when the Israelites sent spies into Canaan, they reported something terrifying. We saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Numbers 13:33. These were not metaphorical descriptions. The Israelites encountered real, living giants, descendants of the ancient Nephilim, still ruling over pockets of the ancient world. And Yahweh's command? Total extermination. The Anakim, a fearsome race of giants whose name is eerily similar to Anunnaki. The Emim and Zamzumim, other giant clans wiped out by divine decree. Og of Bashan, one of the last recorded giants in the Bible. His iron bed, measuring 13 feet 4 meters long, was displayed as proof of his size. And yet, despite their near eradication, legends of these beings never disappeared. They persist in the oral histories of many cultures. And perhaps most chillingly of all, they left behind something we can still see today. The mystery of Gilgal Rephaim. the Wheel of the Giants. In the hills of northern Israel, there lies a structure few people have ever heard of, but one that should not exist. It is called Gilgal Rephaim, or the Wheel of the Giants. Made up of over 42,000 massive basalt rocks, arranged in 5 concentric rings, this ancient monument is so massive that its full shape can only be seen from the air. Archaeologists estimate its construction dates back at least 5,000 years, placing it in the same time period as Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. But here's the problem. Unlike Stonehenge, which was built with advanced engineering techniques, no one knows how Gilgal Rephaim was constructed. The stones are massive, weighing over 20,000 tons in total, and yet they were placed with unbelievable precision, aligned to astronomical events that suggest knowledge far beyond what primitive humans should have had. At its center lies a tomb, sealed beneath layers of rock, untouched for millennia. Who was buried there? A king? A warrior? Or was it the final resting place of a Nephilim, one of the last giants, entombed in a monument built by those who still revered his bloodline? And if that's true, what else is still buried beneath the ruins of the ancient world? Do the Nephilim still exist? Scene transition. The camera zooms in on massive footprints, strange, inexplicable evidence scattered across the globe. Fossilized footprints, larger than any human foot, preserved in stone. For thousands of years, stories of giants have persisted, not just in the Bible, but in cultures all over the world. The Hopi speak of the Palakwapi, a race of ancient giants who lived before the Great Flood. The Norse tell of Jotun, towering beings who once walked among men. The legends of South America describe the Viracocha, giants who helped shape civilization before mysteriously disappearing. Could these legends all be describing the same beings? And if so, did the Nephilim truly vanish, or did some of them survive? Even today, there are strange sightings, whispered reports of enormous humanoid creatures in remote mountains, deep jungles, and isolated deserts, places untouched by modern civilization. Are these just myths, misidentifications, or could it be possible that the bloodline of the Nephilim still lingers, waiting, watching, hidden just beyond the reach of history? The truth has been buried, but it has not been erased. The Bible tells us that the Nephilim were destroyed, but history tells us something different. Their structures remain, their stories persist, and the evidence, though hidden, is still out there. So the real question isn't whether they existed. They were rulers, kings, and gods, their names once carved into the temples of the first civilization. They shaped humanity, they built cities, and they passed down knowledge. But then something happened. A war, a purge, a rewriting of history. The Anunnaki faded into legend. Their names were erased, their temples were abandoned. And in their place, a new god emerged, one who demanded exclusive worship, one who would not tolerate the memory of those who came before him. Yahweh. Was he the last of the Anunnaki? Was he the conqueror who erased his rivals and seized control of mankind? Or was he simply a rebranded version of the gods who came before, their power and stories combined into one? And what of the Nephilim? The giants, the hybrid offspring of gods and men. The Bible tells us they were destroyed, that Yahweh himself wiped them from existence, drowning them in a flood, exterminating them in battle, and hunting down their last remnants. But the ruins say otherwise. The structures they left behind, so massive, so precise, so far beyond the capabilities of ancient man, still stand. Their stories persist in the myths of every major culture. And in remote places, in forbidden lands, there are whispers that some of them may have survived. If that is true, then the war for control over humanity may not be over, because history repeats itself. Every time humanity begins to awaken, every time we begin to seek knowledge beyond what we are allowed to know, something happens. A reset, a disaster, a silencing. And here we are again. We have uncovered traces of a lost past, fragments of a world that was taken from us. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge? Will we forget? Will we look away, pretend we never saw? Or will we finally reclaim the truth that was stolen from us? Because make no mistake, there are those who do not want this knowledge to spread. They have spent centuries keeping these secrets buried. They have rewritten history, silenced voices, and dismissed all who dared to question the narrative. But the evidence is here. The ruins remain, the stories endure, and now you know the truth. If this resonated with you, Don't let this knowledge die here. Subscribe to the channel and be part of the movement to uncover the past. Drop a comment below. Do you believe the Anunnaki once ruled the earth? Do you think the Nephilim still exist? Let's keep this conversation alive. Because this is just the beginning. Changes everything.